Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. This is another webinar about the WEBCON Way. This one is all about how WEBCON BPS addresses Agile organizations. Now, before we get started, there is something that needs to be covered carefully. This is going to be a zero geekery event. We had talked about Agile organizations in the context of features that we use to help with Agile organizations, like support for multiple business entities, support for task substitutions, and so on, multiple languages, multiple currencies. We are going to have a webinar about all of that, possibly as early as next week. Check your mailboxes for promotions about that. If not next week, the week after. We decided to turn this into a two-parter because before we talk about implementation features, we need to talk about agility. Agility itself matters quite a lot. And it's actually one of the things WEBCON BPS excels at and does better than most platforms out there. So let's talk about agility itself and why we think so much about it. So when we talk about agility, I certainly mean agile applications. In other words, being able to move your applications around, make changes to them, learn about them, adapt to them, make sure they get adopted, many things. And I am particularly focused on agile processes because we're WEBCON, we're business process people, we're workflow people. We tend to have a preference, and a strong one, towards thinking about applications in terms of processes as opposed to editing data. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes too. If you put together agile processes and agile applications and a culture that rewards all of that, if you're lucky, you will achieve the status of being an agile organization. And this is really what we think the goal is. And we are not alone on this. Deloitte has this concept of something called the adaptable organization. It's a fundamental shift in operation and management philosophy. It allows large-scale global organizations to operate with a startup mindset. This is really key. It's got a lot of business buzzwords in this description, but if you want to focus on the startup mindset, I'm good with that. And the reason I'm good with that is that startups are willing to make changes immediately because they're constantly dancing on shifting sands and looking for feedback as to what to do next. And they adapt very quickly, and they generally give the person closest to a decision that needs to be made the leeway and the freedom to make that decision. This matters a lot. And Deloitte is just one of many companies and thought leaders talking about this concept. Deloitte calls it the adaptable organization. Other people call it other things. But one thing I think everyone should take away from this is that you can't really plan to adapt. I wish it were the case. It would be nice. But by definition, adapting is something you do in reaction to something else. You want a good example of this? Look, this is being recorded in it's actually being recorded on July 1st of 2020, Canada Day. Happy birthday, Canada. And it is, the United States is still in a heavy reaction to a pandemic. We don't really want to capitalize on this too much as a company, but it is happening. And it has caused a lot of people to adapt pretty radically over a course of multiple months. There's a lot more remote work going on. There's a lot more changes in the way people commute. There's a lot more changes on so many dimensions. Planning for this, not so easy. And all it would take is one shift in reality in order to make the plans not work especially well. What you can do is adopt or plan for a mindset that allows you to adapt to shifting conditions. It's not about making lots and lots of plans. It's about making lots and lots of good thinking people and giving them good tools that allow them to make changes quickly and to make the right changes. Agile is not easy. Agile is actually extremely difficult to do. It's not easy for organizations as a whole, and it's even less easy for IT. I mean, there is an appeal to this, but procurement generally gets in the way. If you're doing work with outside organizations or using outside environments and you don't have investments in place, the procurement process for figuring out what to purchase and what terms to get and any of a number of other logistical details takes a while before you can even begin. And this can't be ignored. You think you can just grab a credit card and buy licenses for something that will affect hundreds or thousands of users. But generally speaking, there's a bit of due diligence that needs to take place before you do that, or you will get heavily, heavily scrutinized. And again, this is sort of farming out agility to other people, but without thinking things through, procurement's going to get in your way. Which is another reason why things are difficult. It's hard to be agile. Scope creep. Processes are often not well understood in advance. And even when the stakeholders have a vivid picture in their mind about what they want, it might not match what they need. Stakeholders also tend to think of new things as time goes by, sometimes in reaction to your initial attempts. And sometimes it's just an extra thing that popped into their mind while they're waiting for you to complete something. It's very, very difficult to envision a solution, a complete solution from a blank page. It is much easier to critique something that is in front of you. We have a lot more success at editing than we do at writing, so to speak. It matters a lot. And part of it is a question of perspective. If you have an itchy back, you know that it itches and you want a back scratcher. And it's really hard to think in detail about what makes for an ideal back scratcher when all you can think about is you itch. And that's why sometimes you will think about more stuff as time goes by, but not at first. So some people think of it as scope creep, meaning I asked for one thing and now I want many, 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 many more things, and I'm bad for doing so. I don't think I'm bad for doing so. I think it is absolutely the nature of the process that situations change, requirements evolve, and requirements mutate. And that is something we just need to be prepared for. Without time to analyze, it's even more likely not to be thoughtfully and calmly researched. There might not be a process at all. One can emerge, but it's not going to emerge through planning. Well, rarely will it emerge through planning. Software as a service is an attractive idea, but it's not a panacea. It's not magic. It's not a sustainable remedy for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is, and by this I'm talking about ready-to-use packages fit to task for one specific purpose. It might solve that immediate need. It might scratch that immediate itch, but the odds are good that you'll then want to do integration between it and something else. The odds are good that you might have certain privacy and security and sovereignty requirements that you might not have thought of initially when you were just trying to get an itch scratched. It will only work long time as, in the long run, as a perfect fit if you're able to do a lot more work on it. This is not to say that cloud cannot be a panacea. The cloud actually might be the right way to do this, but to rely strictly on ready-to-use software applications written by someone else that are hosted in the cloud for you to subscribe to, it might work, it might not. It introduces a bit more risk. You might build your own solution and host it in your own cloud assets. It might be something you write using platform as a service. It might be something that you deploy in infrastructure as a service. It might be that you find a particularly good, adaptable, extensible software as a service solution. Just don't expect magic. How about doing it in-house? Well, there's an appeal to not having procurement to deal with, because that takes time and research and resources. But if you decide to just code everything, well, maintenance is going to be a pain. It's going to be hindered. I actually got into a discussion with someone on Facebook about this last week, I think. And part of it was, he works for a multinational organization, lots of currencies, lots of different regulatory compliance rules, lots of languages. And so he was finding a particular off-the-shelf package for low-code development, not us, something that the package doesn't matter. But the fact that it isn't us does matter, is they ultimately decided that they had too many fit and finish and adaptability requirements to be able to trust widely used low-code environments out there. They knew that they would have to adapt to a lot of extra conditions. They knew that they would have to adapt to languages, currencies, regulatory requirements, differences in policies in different places, and so on. So they built things in-house. And I asked him, what's it like maintaining all that stuff? And we come back to the classic problem of maintaining it as a royal pain in the butt. And every moment they spend adapting handwritten stuff is a moment that they can't spend building the next application that people are asking for. So delivery time can be long, and it's rarely agile enough. It's sometimes perceived as necessary in order to get what you really, really want. But it's also very, very dependent on the mind of the developer, because if that person leaves, or even if that person is promoted, or even if that person works for a really long time on a different project and gets out of the mindset they had for the first application, you're in a lot of trouble. You can try solving this with paired programming, where you've got two people working at every workstation. So there's some sort of redundancy and turn around or backup if necessary. And you can help with a lot of documentation, I suppose. But even so, it's not magic. In-house will help, but in-house might not be enough. In fact, there's a really good chance in the long run, it is not enough. But I see the appeal in the short run. What is definitely an issue, especially by acquiring a lot of one-off software as a service offerings, and even to some extent using in-house efforts, user adoption is going to be a challenge. Why? Because new applications require new skills, usually. They often look different from each other. They often behave in a different way from each other. They often require new knowledge in order to be able to use them. And there is no way, if that is the case, that you can escape needing to allocate time and resources to training. Training takes preparation time. Training requires resources in order to host the training. It requires time on the part of the instructor to develop any courses and to teach those courses. Even more training requires the users, the participants, the actual end users of the solution to devote time away from their main jobs to learning how to use the software. And every time you introduce a new application that behaves in a unique fashion with a unique user interface, this compounds the problem. If you have the ability to maintain some level of consistency across a variety of applications, it will help a lot. But that's not always an easy thing to do. Low code is often perceived as a way of solving a lot of these problems. It can certainly save you a lot of time. Low code adds to agility by cutting down on development cycles and doing a lot of work for you in advance. So if you're not going to just buy something off the shelf, and you're going to build it yourself, your developers, be they professional developers, semi-professional developers, or even amateur/citizen developers, might be able to save themselves a lot of time getting the solution assembled or completed or written using low-code tools. That is absolutely true. The thing about most low-code tools is one of the things they've done in order to make some things happen more quickly is they've taken away some options in order to make certain things happen first and best and most often. This usually happens at the cost of agility. And I'm looking at a couple of solutions that tend to operate in the realm of, well, accounting systems, customer relationship management systems, but it's not limited to that. It can be a lot of things. But typically, when I see something that is very, very hard to adapt, or where low code looks like it helps, but less than one might think, it's usually when someone is focusing on data centrism. And what do I mean by data centrism? A data-centric application is essentially something that puts data in front of you and then says, here's everything you need, you figure it out. A lot of applications work this way. I present you with a bunch of information in a SharePoint list, and in terms of what you're trying to accomplish at the moment, well, you open the form and you figure out what you want to do with that data. It'll involve making some edits. It might involve making some deletions. It might involve sending some alerts out. It might involve a lot of different things. And you might be able to automate some of it. But again, the goal is, the first thing I want to do is give you some data. And I'll give you a user interface that displays that data and allows you to touch that data. What you're supposed to do is the third thing I think about after what is the data and what should it look like. And think about this. I'll just pick, I'm not going to choose one particular customer relationship management system. This will be true of a couple of them. But look, if I am presented with an agreement, what do I have to do to get the agreement registered properly? Well, I might have to register the company first. And then I need to register the contacts with that company that are involved in the agreement. Then I need to register an opportunity in order to have a place to receive the agreement. And then I need to register the purchase order that's part of this agreement. Then I'm going to need to manually change any licensing agreement details. This goes on. And it's not so much that this is, to somebody that does it every day, it's not necessarily a difficult thing, but to somebody who doesn't do it every day, which of these steps are necessary to carry something out? Well, it's not clear. And without going through a lot of training or a lot of standing over someone else's shoulder to figure out how they do it, or asking a lot of questions, you're not going to be able to do everything you need by yourself. That figure it out part, well, that's a rosy expectation, not grounded in reality. Not a fan of data-centric apps unless every user is really familiar with the data in question in terms of what it is, where it is, how it's laid out, what its constraints are, and what you're expected to do with it. And yeah, there are a handful of applications that are only used by a small number of very skilled people. And then, yeah, centrism is great. Get out of their way. They're going to do new and crazy things with it on a daily basis. For the rest of us, data centrism is going to get in our way. Similarly, a lot of low-code efforts tend to be UI-centric. If they're not data-centric, they're UI-centric. And the best way I can figure out to describe what UI-centrism is like is, instead of it being driven by the developer and the database manager, it's driven by the end users. So they decide, here's everything I want. I want a form with all this stuff in it. You figure out what to do with it. You figure out where to put the data that I'm filling out and looking at in the form. You figure out what's supposed to be done with that data once I submit it, et cetera, et cetera. So it puts the burden, instead of on the user, it puts the burden on the developer to think about everything that you might need to do with that form. This starts out feeling more user-focused. It ends up being something that makes users pretty darn unhappy, especially because they initially started with the expectations about getting exactly the form they asked for. But figuring out everything they want to do and making sure that 5 or 6 different things they might want to do with that form data are actually implementable, it's not always the easiest thing in the world. Not surprisingly, because this is a workflow and a process management company, WEBCON is really fond of process-centrism. And what do we mean by that? I mean, if you open up an application, you will immediately be told what you need to do. You need the least training in this environment. What you are supposed to do is right in front of you. If you open a form, the form is fit to task. It's not there to show you some data unless showing you data is part of the task at hand. And even then, it's going to show you the data you need and nothing else. You will not need to chase data. You will not need to figure out what to do with it. A process-centric solution says, here's what you need. Please make a decision. Please provide some input. Move along, and I'll take it from here. It requires the least development. It requires the least maintenance. What to do is derived from a process that gets vetted. There's a model behind what's going on. It has the biggest impact on execution, and more gets done with fewer pauses. Even some CRM systems, and absolutely some sales automation systems, get this. They tend to implement what I'm talking about in something that they refer to as pipelines, which is, make an initial contact in this way, then move them along to this step, and depending on what happens next, do this or that or that. A lot of it is automated completely. Some of it pauses and asks human beings to either make decisions or provide input, or both. But yeah, a pipeline is a business process. That stuff succeeds a lot more than just throwing data in front of you and you deciding what you want to do with it. Now, if you're going to build an application in an agile environment, I do think it's a good idea to be low code, but the right kind of low code. Process centrism is a really good idea. The other thing is, in order to succeed in an agile organization, you need to assume you're going to fail. Don't feel bad about this. Failure is a path to success. I'm not going to put up a slide with the term minimum viable product in this presentation because it's an overused buzzword. It's often used by a lot of lazy people to justify bad software. You just say it's a minimum viable product, and you think you get off the hook from writing bad stuff. What I will say is this: a real minimum viable product, as it was initially conceived, was thought of as you put something out there, you put something up that is enough to solve one business problem, and then you start collecting data on it and constantly amending it, improving it, adapting it, and so on. It's not minimum viable product as the goal, it's minimum viable product as the first step on the way to the goal. So go live as quickly as humanly possible. But when you go live, you need to make sure that your maintenance commitment and your development commitment are pretty much the same. Because initial development, like I said, is just the first step. You are going to be maintaining and evolving and curating. In fact, maintenance isn't even really the right word. Curation is the right word. It just sounds like I'm operating a museum. But curation is the closest word in the English dictionary to what I'm talking about here, because we want to not just make sure everything is okay, but figure out how to improve it and figure out how to enhance it and make it more attractive and make it more valuable. We're going to curate that. And so resources can't step away from the process once the initial stab has been done. We know it's going to be imperfect. We expect people to adapt to it. But if you do that, yeah, you will succeed. If you are willing to look dumb for 5 minutes, 5 hours, maybe 5 days, you will look like a genius for 5 years. You just need to fail and let people tell you where you got it wrong, because it's easy to critique. It's much harder to write abstract specs. Go through a couple of cycles of this and you will arrive at the right kind of product. Of course, the world's going to change out from under you and you're going to need to keep evolving it, but that makes it all the more important to focus on a platform that still lets you build things for yourself and not have to get too bogged down in researching vendors and so on. So keep procurement to a minimum, but gives you the flexibility to go through this constant change approach development cycle. And obviously, we're kind of fond about WEBCON BPS. Why WEBCON the company and WEBCON BPS the product are special? Well, it's for several different reasons, all of which are related to being an agile organization and facilitating that. The first is that the solutions are interconnected. And what I mean by that is, hang on a second. My connection was closed and I'm not really sure why, but we'll find out. I'll come right back. There we go. Okay. Yep. This is a WEBCON solution and I'm looking at the user interface, but what I really want to do is go to the design interface. And here, this is what I wanted. This is a WEBCON BPS solution. Here's one solution, here is a different solution. And let's focus on this one. This has got a workflow design as part of it. It also has a form as part of it. And the form's got a lot of stuff in it. It's laid out into quadrants. This is not so much WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. It's more Wiggins, what you get is no surprise. But everything is arranged into zones. They'll be responsively rendered on either a mobile device or a web page, depending on what the form factor is, but there's no lack of grouping, there's no lack of tabs, there's no lack of tables. All the right stuff is there. But the thing is, the fields in the form and the schema of all available data to the application, it's one environment. The workflow is aware of the forms and what to do with them. The forms are actually aware of the workflow process. In fact, here are the steps in the workflow process. here are the fields in the form. These checkboxes indicate which fields should be present on the form at which step in the process you happen to be residing, and whether they should be read-write or read-only, whether they should be required, etc., etc. There are also business rules that are built into all of this. There are also, let me see, there are custom reports, there are custom dashboards, there are a ton of different things that are all inside of a single design environment so that I can build what I need to do once, rather than the alternative in a lot of other environments is I'll build my form in a form designer, I'll build my workflow in a workflow designer, I'll build my reports in a report designer. I might create user-friendly documentation in yet another modeling or mapping tool. Do you really want to go to 8 different tools to do 8 different things that all relate to a single unified application and the user should see as one thing? Look, composite applications have their place, but integrated applications, those are the things that are easy to adapt. Those are the things that are easy to save time. So let's head back here and talk about other things WEBCON BPS is particularly good at. Everything is driven from a model. And here's what I mean by that. In this particular solution, let's see, we're moving something through. This is our vendor management solution. That's great. How about we switch over to this other one? This is a little bit simpler looking. And this is a solution for handling absence requests, leave requests, and such. And there is a model. We move from the prepare request stage to the manager review stage to the HR review stage to the approved stage, and at any point we might find ourselves, based on what's possible, in the canceled stage. We call them steps. It's just friendlier, but it's a stage, or technically a state. The reason I bring this up is pay attention that if you're in the manager review step, your options are to reject it or to approve it. And if I open this up to look at the description of what's going on during the manager review step, you'll see, please review the request made for time off. There's an explanation as to what's going on at the moment. Now, the payoff to this, let me go here to the user interface and take a look at one leave request. I'm seeing those instructions here. Those 2 options were to approve or reject. Those are the titles of my buttons down here. I saw that there was a model that indicated which fields should be visible on the form at different steps in the process. So there's a table of other users' leave requests and the current user's upcoming approved leave requests. Now, that particular table is in the right panel of the form, and we've decided that we will display it during the review step, both during the manager review step and the HR review step, but we're not going to show it if it gets approved, and we're not going to show it if it gets canceled, and we won't show it during the initial request because it makes no sense to show it there. This model that explains what to do when, the form model works with the workflow model, works with the data model, and it essentially means that these instructions, the model is the application. This application will do whatever the model tells it to do. And that relates to, since we are model-based and since we are an integrated environment, it allows us to do the thing that we are best known for, which is something called InstantChange. Now, InstantChange literally means you can change an application and have the change take effect instantly. Instantly upon deployment or instantly upon editing. And we don't just mean new instances, we mean everything running at any given time. At the risk of talking about military stuff, The best way I can describe the difference between what we do and what just about everyone else does is if you don't have InstantChange. Oh, wait, my apologies. I went the wrong way. If you don't have InstantChange, you're pretty much firing a missile. If you do have InstantChange, you're firing a drone or launching a drone. The difference between launching a missile and a drone. A missile is something that you aim at a target before you launch it. But once you launch it, the only option you've got is to hit a remote destruct button, basically detonate it before it hits the target. You've seen that in countless movies and such. That's your choice. You can monitor it in a one-way fashion to see where it is, and your option is to abort it. Workflows without InstantChange work this way. You launch them, you can track them, you can cancel them, and then restart them. That's about it. With InstantChange, however, it's like you're commanding a drone. So you can, certainly you have a course at the beginning, but you can change it at any point and tell the drone to do something different, and it will do it. And you're engaged in two-way communication at all times. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. In fact, I'll do this. Right now, I'm looking at a leave request for leave on the 27th. All right. Now, if you want to see where this is at the moment, it's in the manager review stage. It's assigned to this user, and I can see the other employees in our team and when they're going to be gone, and I can see when I've approved leave for this person in the past. This is all well and good, and I can see that my options are to approve it or reject it. Okay, for the moment, I'm quite happy. And in a moment, I will probably choose to reject it because too many other people are going to be gone at the same time. But let's look at what's going to happen if I do that. If I reject it, it's going to be canceled. Now, remember how I said we get something out there and then we collect feedback? Let's say we've done this a couple of times and users tell us, well, you know something, if I reject it, that means that, yes, we'll faithfully send a notice to the person so they can send in a new request and try for a different point in time. But you know what might be a whole lot better is if I can, in my explanation as to why I'm rejecting it, say, you can't take a vacation this week, here's why. You're welcome to propose a different time and send it back to me. What if I don't want to throw away the work that's happened so far? How about I take this, and instead of when someone rejects it, it goes into canceled. Why don't I just give it back to the original author? I mean, the original author can still cancel the request. In fact, let's do the same thing for the human resources department. So if anyone decides, I don't want to do this, we'll send it back to prepare a request instead of on to cancel. All right, now here's the thing. This is already at the manager review step. And in fact, I have this form open. I'm editing it at the moment. I have the option to approve or reject it. Okay. Now, I'm going to save this. I said InstantChange, I meant InstantChange. So now I'm going to save the process, and I'm going to come right back here. And without me having to do anything, I'm not going to reload the form. I'm not going to make a single change. I'm going to hit reject. I am going to be told that I need to have a couple of attributes taken care of before I go any further. I'll say that they should have Bill take care of anything. And I'm also going to be required to provide some comments if I click reject. So I will put in try 1 week later. That week, too many people will be gone. Now I'll reject it. And watch what happens. This rejection that just happened went back. It went back to me. It went back to the original author, who is now responsible for making a change to it. So it didn't go into the, it did not, went back to Alf, whose job it is to now do something with it. It is not in the hands of Alice anymore. The right thing happened. That's instant change. Consistency is also incredibly important. And here's what we mean by consistency. We are talking about training costs. And if every solution is completely unique, every user needs to be trained on every single solution. And in the world of WEBCON BPS, we have the ability to host a lot of different solutions for very different purposes that look very different from each, well, they have a very consistent look, even if they're fit and finished to task. So here's a solution for tracking risk management solutions. There's a dashboard with pending tasks and the ability to launch new items and a list of risks going on at the moment and charts and analyses and so on. But you know, this is the form for working with those things. Well, it just so happens, here's the form for working on client intake solutions. Here are details about the current client. Here are details about the contacts associated with that client, the services they'd like us to perform, details about the engagement, who we got this from and who's going to be paid commission on them if we agree to take this particular client on, et cetera, et cetera. Here's a different solution that involves managing purchase requests. And if I open up this particular item, I look at this form, and this form's got details coming from different places. There's parent information, child information, info pulled from other ERP or CRM systems and Active Directory, and attachments and charts and attached emails and a running comment thread. But still, this doesn't look very different from this. They clearly have different fields, they have different colors, they've got slightly different branding. But if you understand the leave solution, you understand the purchase request solution without a lot of fuss. And we can keep going. This is one that's an expense report. This is one that's for evaluating marketing campaigns. It's consistent. It is about as hassle-free as it's going to get. In fact, let's kick this up a notch. We're looking at consistency inside of a standalone web application. But if we deploy this solution so that it's hosted inside of SharePoint, we still see the same stuff in a consistent, understandable way, including the forms and everything else. If you would like to see that in Teams, that's great. We got your back. We will hook you up. Here is the exact same scenario living inside of Teams, including dashboard telemetry and everything else under the sun. If you want to work in Outlook, same kind of deal. Here is a new risk assessment that needs to be performed inside of an email. The details are in the body text of the email, but there's also a token that launches the compact view of the form right inside of Outlook. And something very similar to this is what the mobile-friendly form looks like if you're using our mobile application. So consistency across applications, consistency across even targeted bespoke user experiences. Everybody wins in WEBCON BPS. Users require much less training than they would otherwise need. Right on top of consistency is clarity, because if it's clear as to what it is you're supposed to be doing and it's clear as to how an application works, well, that, again, saves a ton of time, increases the chance of adoption, and increases the success of a solution. So when I say clarity, what I'm referring to is, well, just as one example, let's go back here. I'll go here to this workflow model. And again, this is a fairly simple looking workflow model. This is what you might build in Visio or a couple of other specific tools for modeling solutions. The thing is, in most of those tools, you would then click a button to go out and generate either code or generate a much more complex flow chart that is what's used to actually build the solution. In our case, the high-level diagram is the solution. And why? The secret is in all of these gear icons. These are the steps that the process goes through. Prepare a request to manager review to HR review to approved. And here are the transitions or the paths between steps. So I will, if I'm preparing the request, I will then follow the path of submit to manager review. And along that path, I'm going to do some stuff. And in fact, here, when HR finally signs off on something, about 6 things have to happen before we agree that it's ready and that it's approved and the person can take the time. On a lot of diagrams, those 6 things would be cluttering up everything. In fact, we'd have to test each one of them to make sure they succeeded and roll it back if anything bad happened. Here, these are 6 particular things that are queued up to happen along that path. They're sitting one level below the surface, so they're easy to get at. But the other thing is, if any of them fail, we roll everything back. This stuff executes as a transaction. So we don't lose any richness, we don't lose any capability, but we've designed this so that it is clear. I can show this to the stakeholders. They can tell us if we did something right or did something wrong. And it helps a lot. Here's the other thing that we can do. I can document this in a couple of seconds. I can click Generate Documentation. And all of this model information that defines my application can be combined with our document generation capability to create solution documentation, something that explains exactly how the application works, both in general and specific to this application. Let's go open the document that was just created. I'll go here to Documents, and the most recent document that was generated is right here. It is, of course, a Word document. And I think the last time I had Word open, it was showing things in the reader view, which means we can look at multiple pages at once. Yes, good. All right, so we're looking at multiple pages at once. The first few pages are how WEBCON BPS applications work in general, but about halfway through, it talks about this particular solution. This is the workflow path. This is the data schema. These are the particular business rules involved. Everything about this solution is extremely well documented, and I got it with one click. And that, my friends, is a big part of clarity too. What else? How about responsibility? How about performance and scalability and documentation we talked about? How about analysis? How about being able to maintain this solution and collaborate with others on it? All of that is extremely possible. In fact, the telemetry that is often collected by some other systems, you have to log that data yourself, mark up your model with extra steps that emit data and send it to some warehouse or something to that effect. This is something we do automatically. And in fact, if we want to, we can display some of that telemetry inside of the design environment when we wish to. You can see how often we tend to follow this path versus this path. We can see how often people decide to do one thing or another. I can even analyze how much time people spend in different steps if I wish to do so. Or for that matter, that same telemetry data can be used here inside of a purchasing request. How about we take a look at the entire audit trail for the form from start to finish? And yeah, we can look at this table to see what changed and when and how. But what I can do that's even more fun sometimes, especially if I'm an auditor and not a geek, is I want to look at what the form looked like when someone initially filled it out. And then I want to see what it looked like by the initial reviewer. And then what did the initial reviewer do? Sent it back with these comments. And then what did the participant or initial author of the request do? They sent back a response with other comments and some changes made, and so on and so forth. I've got the whole audit trail for the entire thing, and the audit trail is tightly coupled to the data. So if I migrate this or archive it, nothing ever gets lost. That's a big part of responsibility too. So in essence, these are all applications that are designed to be adapted on the fly, but still easy to teach, still easy to build, easy to maintain, easy to change, easy to report on, easy to scale, easy to do all of those things. Ultimately, agility is not about being clever. I mean, cleverness always helps. It's always good to be smart. It's always good to come up with an idea someone else didn't. But real agility is about the ability to execute. And you can't execute unless you adapt constantly. And that way of thinking is something we like to call the WEBCON way. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. And if you'd like more information about WEBCON the company, WEBCON BPS the product, or upcoming webinars or upcoming, well, already available YouTube video content and how-to articles and any of a number of different types of content, all roads start from www.webcon.com. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. And if you've got any questions, by all means, feel free to type them into the chat window now. I'll wait around for a minute or two to see what you've got. You can ask me literally any question of any kind about the products, about the company, about just about anything. If you've got a question and it might take a while to formulate, that's okay. Just type quickly, I'm working on it, or question coming, something like that. All right, I will pretend this is an auction. I will say we are going once, we are going twice, and we are done. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you next time. Bye.